Okay, so there's only one thing you need to know. The use of fractal wrongness in any real discussion is fractally wrong. Literally anyone who uses the term unironically deserves to be called edgy, degenerate, or whatever other reactionary term there is. Okay, that's it for this video. Bye! Obviously, if you want to use it in an imaginary discussion, I can't really stop you. And with that very complex joke out of the way, let's get on to the subject of this video. So yeah, fractal wrongness is basically a meme and I refuse to call it anything else. Why that is we'll get to in a moment, but first we'll have a look at the origins of fractal wrongness. The term first appeared in the Lexicon of Computing in 2001. As defined by the original author, the state of being wrong at every conceivable scale of resolution, that is, from a distance a fractally wrong person's worldview is incorrect, and furthermore if you zoom in on any small part of that person's worldview, that part is just as wrong as the whole worldview. Additionally, the author elaborates on how it is impossible to refute a fractally wrong person's worldview, because it supposedly leads to an infinite regress, where every additional argument requires just as much time to refute as the previous one. And that if you were to encounter a fractally wrong person, that you should just shut down the conversation immediately. As described by the Rational Wiki, which, yes, it's not a very reliable source, but that's part of my point. There are different kinds of worldviews that are considered fractally wrong. In the list of quote-unquote fractally wrong worldviews are alternative medicine, astrology, religious fundamentalism, climate change denial, Holocaust denial, homeopathy, New Age woo, race realism, creationism, TERFs and FLIRFs. But the list isn't exhaustive. Which I would agree with, these ideas are pretty harmful, but to immediately shut down conversation when encountering these people seems counterproductive. If anything, fractal wrongness should not be assumed and the arguments being put forward should be addressed. This requires some effort, but at least it allows you to point out flawed argumentation and possibly call out bad intentions. So yeah, that's the main problem I have with fractal wrongness. Instead of coming up with a good counter-argument, fractal wrongness is often used in order to immediately shut down conversation, which helps literally nobody, because the arguments that are wrong will remain unaddressed. Another reason for why people seem to like using fractal wrongness is just to look smart. I mean, if you really want to look smart, maybe just use fractal terminology and put it into a logical fallacy. That will work. And for those who were planning on doing that, you'll be pleased to know I've already done part of the work for you. Okay, so let's start off with a relatively simple one called the snowflake argument. Just because you think someone is being a Koch does not invalidate their point. Up next is the Misiurewicz void. You keep on insisting the center of the Misiurewicz point does not escape, even after an infinite amount of iterations. So, what exactly does that mean? Misiurewicz points are points within the Mandelbrot set's boundary where spirals tend to form. In this area, parameters tend to form orbits that are either not differentiable or have a derivative equal to 0. In these areas, periodic spirals tend to form, and in such a way that after an infinite number of iterations, the spiral will be completely self-similar. But that does mean that all points within that spiral will have to escape the boundary of the Mandelbrot set. If that doesn't happen, that means there's something fishy going on. So, the next one. Branching off. You constantly go on tangents trying to bring up things that aren't relevant for this discussion. This one could be applied to multiple different logical fallacies, but the closest would be a red herring. When in discussion with someone, it can be pretty annoying when they try to bring up things that aren't related to the subject matter. Either somewhat unintentionally or as a deliberate attempt to derail the conversation. An example of something that would be particularly annoying as a red herring would be bringing up memes. If your main tactic is to use memes to either distract or annoy your opponent, just prepare to be called a coward, because people are going to call you out for that. Which, could also be applied to the things I'm doing right here. Well, isn't that great? I'm making a fool out of myself. Don't worry, it will make sense by the end of the video. Okay, this one is plain and simple, literally. Within or without the boundary. You're making it seem like the boundary of the set does not exist, leaving only two seemingly correct responses. When determining the shape of an escape time fractal like the Mandelbrot set, coordinates from the complex plane are put through a recursive function, and if the values that come from this approach infinity, they are classed as being outside of the set. Values that don't approach infinity, on the other hand, are considered to be inside the set, which makes for a relatively simple image. However, if you were to number each iteration and then give it a different color as the previous iteration, you would get a picture that has so much more nuance than just distinct values that are either inside or outside the set. So, in case you didn't know, the complete name of Benoit B. Mandelbrot is Benoit 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 Benoit. Next is the appeal to the renderer. The shape of a fractal is dependent on its function, not on the person behind the PC rendering it. This is otherwise known as the genetic fallacy, which incorrectly bases the true value of a statement on its source. Okay, let's move on. Next is the self-avoiding cogitation. Parts of your argumentation are incompatible with one another, but you try your best to avoid it. This one isn't really a logical fallacy, but a cognitive bias, otherwise known as cognitive dissonance. And the curve being used here is a random self-avoiding walk, which fills a space by quote-unquote walking around erratically. And then there's the cardioid squabble. Yeah, this is obviously an appeal to emotion. Where's my violin? And finally, there's two more logical fallacies. The set interpretation and the Julia transgression. The idea of these is that one is part of the other or vice versa, and the fallacy is that either a small part is used to generalize over the entire set, or that the entire set has the exact same properties of a smaller part of it, which are the composition and division fallacies, which, if you think about it, can also be applied to fractal wrongness. Which brings me to the main point of this video. Telling someone they are fractally wrong is not the same as pointing out a logical fallacy. At best, fractal wrongness is not much more than a meme, and at worst, it's only a buzzword. Even if we were to grant that it's logically consistent, it's not a good substitute for an argument or a counter-argument. So don't even bother to bring it up. Instead, maybe put a little bit more work in formulating your own position. And maybe do a little bit more to reach a mutual understanding of the topic that's being discussed by actually listening to your interlocutor. So yeah, that's my comprehensive guide, or rather rant, on fractal wrongness as far as that goes. Do I think these memes are actually going to be used? No. I don't think that will happen, but who knows. As long as it's not in a discussion or anything, I'm completely fine with the memes being used. So why did I make this video? It's mainly because there were some things I was quite annoyed about and I wanted to talk about. Mainly when it comes to pointing out logical fallacies and cognitive biases. Being able to recognize them in your own argumentation and possibly also in your opponent's argumentation is completely fine, but pointing them out should not distract from the topic that's being discussed. A lot of value is being put on these, which I completely understand, but if that's all you can do, then you're not a very good interlocutor. Instead of just pointing out flaws in your opponent's argumentation, maybe try understanding your opponent's point a little bit better. And if there is a flaw that really gets in the way of conversation, instead of just addressing it, also explain why their argumentation is wrong and how a better argument can be constructed. Listening to whoever you're talking to can really help with this, especially if you want to steelman their position later on. I mean, having an approach like that can really help to make the conversation more pleasant. The first time I got called out for committing a logical fallacy, I had no idea what I had just done wrong. It didn't excuse the ad hominem I just used there, but a little bit of an explanation as to why I was wrong would have been really helpful. It was only like 2 years later that I finally found out what I had done wrong, and it would have been great if I had known earlier. Anyway, the memes are in the description in case you want to check them out. There's also a few sources on logical fallacies and cognitive biases. The used software and music are also in the description. So yeah, I guess that wraps up this video. Remember, branch out into the unknown and try not to be factually wrong.